My wife slapped me to humiliate me before friends and her lover, but she never expected my revenge. It was supposed to be a normal day, a quiet Saturday in the garage, tinkering with my old Chevy. But what started as routine ended in shock. My wife, the woman I trusted more than anything, suddenly shattered everything I thought I knew. And the way it all unfolded left me completely speechless. So here's the big question. How would you react if you uncovered the ultimate betrayal from someone you loved? Stick with me, because you're not going to believe how this story ends. As I crouched in the garage, tightening the last bolt on the brake pads of my old Chevy, the early morning sun was already creeping into the space, turning it into a sauna. The familiar scent of motor oil and grease hung thick in the air. It was supposed to be just another Saturday, one of those rare, peaceful days where I could get lost in the hum of an engine, the rhythm of the tools in my hands, the satisfaction of fixing something myself. The kind of day where, at least for a few hours, I didn't have to think too hard about anything. No work deadlines, no emails, no nagging thoughts in the back of my mind. Just me, the car, and the gentle comfort of knowing I had nowhere else I needed to be. That's how it should have been. But life, I've come to learn, has a funny way of tearing through the thin veneer of normalcy just when you start to believe it'll last. Vanessa's voice floated in from the doorway, soft and casual. "Hey, babe. Coffee?" I glanced up, seeing her framed in the dim light of the garage. She looked like she always did on a lazy morning long, dark hair pulled into a loose bun, wearing her usual gray sweatpants, and a tank top. She held a steaming mug in one hand, and for a brief moment, everything felt normal, comfortable. I wiped my hands on a rag and reached for the coffee. "Thanks," I murmured, taking a sip. The warmth of the drink spread through me, familiar and reassuring. But something about the moment felt off. I couldn't pinpoint it at first, just a faint unease that crept up my spine. Vanessa leaned against the doorway, her voice light and breezy. "Naomi and I are going shopping today. Maybe grab lunch, hit the spa after." I nodded absently, focused on tightening another bolt. "Sounds nice. You'll be out all day?" "Yeah, don't wait up for dinner," she said with a quick smile, turning to head back into the house. And that should have been the end of it, just another normal day. But as I finished up in the garage, her words kept replaying in my head, slow and deliberate. There was something practiced about her tone, too smooth, too effortless. And then there was the way she lingered in the doorway, instead of stepping closer, like she usually did. The way her smile had come just a beat too late, as if she'd forced it. I told myself I was overthinking. Vanessa and Naomi had been best friends for years. It wasn't unusual for them to spend a day together. But even as I tried to brush it off, that tiny seed of doubt planted itself firmly in my chest. By the time she came down the stairs to leave, I found myself watching her a little more closely. She wasn't just dressed for a casual day out. She was dressed. A beige silk dress clung to her frame, her legs accentuated by heels. I'd only seen her wear to formal events. Her hair, now cascading in soft waves, looked like it had taken hours to style. Her makeup was flawless, just a touch too perfect. She paused by the door and glanced at me, her smile brighter than it needed to be. "You look nice," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. Vanessa hesitated, just for a split second, then shrugged lightly. "Naomi and I are trying a new place downtown. Thought I'd put in a little effort." She leaned down, kissed me on the cheek, and whispered, "See you tonight." And just like that, she was gone. I sat there for a long moment, staring at the space she'd left behind. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the fridge in the kitchen. It was nothing, I told myself again. People dress up sometimes. It doesn't mean anything. But as the hours dragged on, that nagging thought refused to leave. By late afternoon, I was absently scrolling through my phone, my mind barely registering the football game on TV. It wasn't like Vanessa to stay out all day without at least texting. Even a quick lunch was great, or at the spa, "Be home soon." She always sent something. But today, nothing. The silence was deafening. Still, I tried to convince myself that it was no big deal. Maybe she was just caught up in the moment, enjoying herself. Then I found myself walking into our bedroom, my eyes landing on the laundry basket in the corner. Overflowing with clothes from the week, it was the kind of chore I usually put off until Vanessa reminded me. With nothing else to do, I figured I might as well get it out of the way. I sorted through the usual mix of jeans, t-shirts, and socks, humming under my breath as I folded. But then my hand brushed against something that didn't belong. A black silk tie. I froze. It was smooth, expensive, the kind of tie that belonged to someone who wore tailored suits. I didn't own a tie like that. Vanessa certainly didn't wear them. Frowning, I held it up, searching for some kind of explanation. A brand tag, initials, anything. But there was nothing. Just the tie and a heavy feeling sinking in my chest. Maybe she'd borrowed it. Maybe Naomi's husband had left it behind after a party. But as I draped it over the edge of the basket, another realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The tie smelled like her perfume. It wasn't faint, it was strong, lingering. My mind raced, searching for a logical explanation. But no matter how hard I tried, nothing made sense. That tiny crack in the foundation of our life together, that small seed of doubt, suddenly felt a whole lot bigger. That night, when Vanessa finally came home, she was all smiles and laughter, her face glowing from the supposed spa treatments. She kissed my cheek, breezed past me into the kitchen, and dropped her purse on the counter. "Long day," she said, grabbing a glass of water. I wanted to ask her right then. I wanted to hold up the tie, tell her what I'd found, and demand an explanation. But instead, I kept my voice even, my tone light. "By the way, I found a tie in the laundry earlier. You know where it came from?" She froze just for a heartbeat. It was subtle, but I caught it. Her eyes widened, just barely, and then she laughed lightly. "Oh, that's James's. He left it here when we were helping him prep for an event at work. Must have ended up in my bag." Her response was smooth. Too smooth. I nodded slowly, forcing a smile. Makes sense. But inside, I knew. A second crack had formed. And soon, the whole damn thing would shatter. Over the next few days, I tried to shake the uneasy feeling, but it clung to me like a shadow. Vanessa was her usual self, warm, friendly, casual, always quick to smile and crack a joke. But something was different now. Every time she kissed me goodbye, every time she breezed out the door, I couldn't help but notice the little details I'd never paid attention to before. The way she checked her phone more often. The way she lingered in the mirror a few seconds longer. The way her clothes seemed just a touch more expensive. A bit more polished. I'd tell myself it was nothing, but the doubts kept creeping back in. I couldn't stop myself from replaying that moment in the garage, that too smooth explanation about the tie. The quick laugh she used to brush it off. It didn't add up, but I wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. Then came the evening she stayed out late, too late. It was a Friday, and Vanessa said she was meeting Naomi for dinner. Nothing unusual there. I didn't think twice about it until the clock passed 10. Then 11, then midnight. She hadn't texted. She always texted. By the time she walked through the door, smiling like nothing was wrong, I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. She leaned down, kissed my cheek, and said, "Dinner ran long." Naomi and I lost track of time. I nodded, trying to keep my face neutral, but something in her tone felt off, too rehearsed, too easy. I let it go, though. If I pressed too hard, I knew she'd just get defensive, maybe even turn it around on me. And I didn't want that. I needed to be sure. I needed more than just a hunch. So I started paying closer attention. Not stalking her, not snooping, just noticing. She left the house earlier than usual a few mornings. Claimed she had errands to run. When I offered to join her, she'd laugh it off, saying, "You've got enough on your plate. Don't worry about it." Her phone stayed in her pocket more often. When she did pull it out, she turned the screen away from me. It wasn't glaringly obvious, just subtle enough to make me question if I was seeing things that weren't really there. But then there was the perfume. A new bottle, one I'd never seen before. A scent that wasn't like the others. She usually wore this one was bold. Floral. Expensive. When I asked about it, she said it was a gift from Naomi, something they'd picked up on a shopping trip. It sounded plausible enough, but there was a hesitation in her voice that she couldn't quite hide. A split-second pause before she answered. I noticed it because I was looking for it. The first real tipping point came when I found the second piece of evidence. I was cleaning out the bedroom closet, just trying to be helpful. I came across a small velvet pouch tucked behind a stack of folded sweaters. Inside was a pair of cufflinks. Gold. Engraved with initials I didn't recognize. They were pristine, polished, clearly expensive. I held them in my hand, turning them over, feeling the weight of them, the reality of them. They weren't mine. And I was damn sure they weren't Vanessa's. That night, as we sat down for dinner, I casually asked, "Hey, do you know where these came from?" I slid the cufflinks across the table. She stared at them for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she let out a laugh light, airy, and fake as hell. "Oh, those! They're James's. He must have left them here when he and Naomi stopped by the other night." I raised an eyebrow. "I don't remember them stopping by." "Well, you were out. I think you were working late. It was just a quick visit. I forgot to mention it." She waved it off, smiling like it was no big deal. But it was a big deal. That explanation was too convenient. Too smooth. It didn't sit right. And the initials? JRI. Couldn't think of a single James we knew with those initials. But I didn't push it. I just nodded, picked up my fork, and pretended to drop it. "Guess I'll get them back to him next time I see him." "Sure," she said quickly, a little too quickly. Later that night, I looked at those cufflinks again, turning them over in my hands, tracing the engraving with my thumb. They felt like a piece of a puzzle I didn't want to put together. They felt like confirmation, even if I didn't have all the answers yet. I tucked them back into the pouch, shoved it back in the closet, and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something was going on. I couldn't say exactly what, but I could feel it, deep in my gut. I decided I needed to be more methodical. If I was going to get to the bottom of this, I had to do it smart. Rushing in, accusing her without concrete proof, wouldn't get me anywhere. It would just make her more careful. So I started planning. I started paying closer attention to where she said she'd be, what she was wearing, what she was bringing home. I took mental notes of her excuses, her stories, her subtle changes in behavior. The hardest part was acting normal around her. Smiling when she smiled, laughing at her jokes, kissing her goodnight, all while I felt this growing knot of suspicion in my chest. I didn't want to believe it. I wanted her to prove me wrong. I wanted to find some logical explanation that would make all of it disappear. But every time I tried to rationalize it, something else would pop up, a little lie, a tiny inconsistency, a flicker of hesitation in her voice. And each one made the knot tighten just a little more. I started keeping a notebook, just a plain old spiral-bound notebook I hid in my desk drawer. In it, I wrote down dates, times, and details. I wrote down the exact wording of her excuses, the moments she seemed off, the things that didn't add up. It felt crazy at first, like I was turning into some kind of amateur detective. But the more I wrote, the clearer the patterns became. She left earlier. She stayed out later. She got more dressed up. She hesitated more when I asked questions. And that tie, those cufflinks, that new perfume, each one a red flag waving in front of me, daring me to ignore it. I couldn't ignore it. Not anymore. By now, you've seen the cracks forming. You know something's not right. But let me ask you this, what would you do if you found out your partner wasn't just lying, but carefully plotting against you? Would you confront them immediately, or would you wait, gather proof, and hit them with undeniable evidence? Comment 1 if you'd confront them right away. Comment 2 if you'd play it cool and wait for the perfect moment. Your choice might just say more about you than you think. The next morning, I got up before sunrise. The house was still and quiet. The kind of quiet that makes every small sound echo like the creak of the floorboards under my feet as I moved toward the garage. I kept my footsteps light, careful not to wake Vanessa. In the garage, I leaned against the hood of my Chevy, gripping my phone tightly. The screen glowed in the dim light, displaying the GPS tracker app I'd installed the night before. Vanessa's car was parked exactly where it should be, just down the street in the driveway. I stared at that little blinking dot, feeling the weight of what I was about to do. I wasn't proud of it. Sneaking around, tracking her movements, it felt wrong. But I was past the point of trusting my gut. I needed evidence. Proof. And if I was going to find it, I had to take this step. The plan was simple. I'd follow her. I'd watch where she went, who she met, and what she did when she thought no one was looking. I took my coffee in a thermos, grabbed a baseball cap from the coat rack, and slipped into my truck. The engine rumbled softly as I pulled out of the driveway, keeping a comfortable distance from her car. She had mentioned running errands that morning. Something about picking up a gift for a friend's baby shower. I couldn't remember the exact details, and it didn't matter. What mattered was where she actually went. I followed her down the main road, past the strip mall, and onto the highway. She drove steadily, her pace a little faster than usual. Maybe it was the coffee, or the lack of sleep, but my senses felt sharper than ever. Every turn she made, every lane change, every stoplight, I noticed it all. My hand stayed firm on the wheel, my eyes fixed on her taillights. About 20 minutes later, her car turned into the parking lot of a small coffee shop. It wasn't unusual for her to stop for a latte. In fact, I'd seen her do it 100 times before, but instead of going through the drive-thru, she parked and went inside. I pulled into a space a few rows back, just close enough to keep her in sight. I adjusted my cap, slouched lower in my seat, and waited. My fingers drummed lightly on the steering wheel as the minutes dragged by. After what felt like an eternity, she walked out, a coffee cup in hand. She glanced around the parking lot before getting back into her car. I tensed, suddenly aware of how exposed I felt sitting there, watching her. She didn't seem to notice me, though. She started the engine and pulled out, heading toward the highway again. I followed, my pulse picking up. This was it. This was the moment when she would go wherever she was really going. I stayed a few cars behind, careful not to close the gap too quickly. The minutes ticked by as she drove past familiar landmarks. I thought maybe she was heading to Naomi's place after all. Maybe I'd been wrong about everything. But then she took a sudden turn off the main road, down a quiet residential street I didn't recognize. My grip on the wheel tightened. I checked the GPS tracker on my phone. The signal showed her car slowing down, then stopping in front of a modest single-story house. I pulled over a block away, just out of sight, and watched from the rearview mirror. She got out of the car, holding her coffee cup, and walked up to the front door. A man stepped out to greet her. He was tall, mid-30s, wearing a button-down shirt and khakis. Not the kind of guy I'd ever seen before. They exchanged a few words, and then she handed him something from her purse. I couldn't make out what it was, but the way she smiled at him, it was a smile I hadn't seen in years. Not the polite smile she used at dinner parties, or the warm smile she gave me when I came home from work. This was different. It was relaxed, easy, and intimate. They went inside, and the door closed behind them. I sat there, staring at the house, feeling like the air had been knocked out of my chest. I didn't know what was happening in there, but I knew it wasn't what she'd told me. My mind raced, jumping to conclusions, trying to piece together the fragments of information I had. It wasn't enough. I needed more. I needed to be sure before I confronted her. I reached for my phone, taking a few deep breaths to steady my hands. My fingers hovered over the screen, as I debated whether to take a picture of the house, the license plate on her car, anything that could be used later. But I stopped myself. This wasn't the time. If I rushed in, if I acted too soon, I'd lose any chance of getting the truth. So I waited. I waited until she came back out, her smile just as bright, her coffee cup empty. She got in her car and drove off, leaving me parked there, staring at that quiet little house. The rest of the drive home was a blur. My thoughts spiraled, replaying every moment I just witnessed. The way she laughed with him. The way she handed him something. What was it? Money? A gift? Or was it something more personal, more damning? I didn't have answers yet, but I knew one thing for sure. Whatever was going on, she wasn't going to tell me the truth. I'd have to find it on my own. After what I'd seen at that house, there was no going back. The man, the exchange, that too familiar smile, everything screamed that something was happening right under my nose. But knowing wasn't enough. Not yet. I needed to be certain. I needed to have something she couldn't deny, couldn't talk her way out of. If I was going to confront her, I had to be ready. That meant digging deeper, paying even closer attention, piecing together the truth no matter how much it hurt. So I started small. I stopped asking questions and started observing. Every morning, I'd watch her routine. What time she left, how long she took to get ready, the clothes she wore, the bags she carried. When she said she was meeting Naomi, I'd glance at her phone left face down on the counter and wonder if I could get to it before she came back. But I didn't, not yet. I told myself I wasn't ready to cross that line, not until I was absolutely sure. But the temptation was always there, gnawing at the edges of my resolve. Then came the afternoon I found her second phone. She'd left her gym bag in the back seat of her car, and I noticed it when I went to grab a jacket from the garage. I don't know what made me unzip that side pocket. Maybe it was just a hunch, or maybe I was tired of feeling like the fool in my own home. When I opened it, there it was, a cheap burner phone, tucked away like some dirty little secret. I stood there, holding it in my hand, my mind racing. Who was she calling? Who was she texting? Why hadn't I seen this before? My heart hammered as I powered it on, half expecting to see a flurry of incriminating messages. But the screen was blank, locked behind a 4-digit code. I stared at it, my thumb hovering over the keypad. I tried her birthday, our anniversary, even the numbers I knew she used for bank accounts and emails. Nothing worked. The lock screen just sat there, staring back at me like a cold, unblinking eye. For a moment, I felt like smashing it right then and there. The frustration, the anger, the feeling of being shut out of my own life was almost too much to take. But I didn't. Instead, I put it back in the bag, zipped it up, and returned it to her car. My hands were shaking as I walked back into the house, my head buzzing with questions. That phone wasn't something she could explain away with a laugh and a wave of her hand. It wasn't just another piece of clothing or a gift from a friend. It was deliberate, hidden, and full of answers I couldn't get to yet. I knew I'd have to bide my time, wait for the right moment to catch her off guard. I just didn't know how much longer I could keep this up. I went back to my notebook, writing down every detail, what I'd seen at the house, the times she left and came back, the fact that she now had a second phone. As the days passed, the picture became clearer, the pieces starting to fit together. But the more I uncovered, the more questions I had. Why would she go to such lengths to hide this? Why not just end it and move on? It wasn't just about an affair. It felt bigger than that, more calculated. Like she wasn't just lying to me, she was planning something. And that thought chilled me more than anything else. I started noticing her spending habits too. Small things at first: a new pair of heels she didn't mention, a designer handbag I'd never seen before. When I brought it up casually over dinner, she smiled and said it was a gift from Naomi. But I knew Naomi couldn't afford that kind of luxury. I didn't press her though. Not then. I kept the conversation light, pretending I was none the wiser. But inside, the knot in my stomach tightened. Each new piece of evidence added another layer of doubt, another reason to keep digging. Then one day, she left her laptop open on the kitchen counter. I stared at it, hesitating. It was an opportunity handed to me on a silver platter. But part of me still felt conflicted. Was it really okay to invade her privacy like this? Did I have any right to snoop through her personal things? But that voice in my head, the one that had been whispering something's not right for weeks, overruled my hesitation. I sat down, opened the lid, and started looking. I checked her email first, scrolling past newsletters and spam, until I found a series of messages marked unread. They were from an account I didn't recognize, using a name that didn't belong to anyone I knew. The subject lines were vague: meeting time, itinerary, next steps. When I opened the most recent one, my blood ran cold. It was a detailed itinerary for a business trip I hadn't heard a word about. The dates matched the days she'd claimed she was out running errands. The locations weren't places Naomi would go. They were upscale hotels, private meeting rooms, places Vanessa had no reason to be. And the tone of the email was professional. But there was something personal about the way they addressed her. Looking forward to seeing you again, it ended, with a name I didn't recognize. I closed the laptop and sat back in my chair, staring at the blank screen. My hands trembled as I reached for my notebook and wrote down what I'd found. It wasn't just suspicion anymore, it was real. It was happening. And I was right in the middle of it, watching my life unravel piece by piece. I felt like I was living in a fog, each passing day thicker and more suffocating than the last. Every detail I uncovered, every new piece of evidence should have been enough for me to walk right up to Vanessa and demand the truth. But I couldn't do it yet. I needed more. More clarity. More confirmation. More understanding of the full scope of what was happening. It wasn't just the betrayal that haunted me. It was the meticulousness of it all. Vanessa wasn't being careless, she was careful, calculated, and alarmingly good at hiding things. But no matter how good she couldn't cover every angle. She couldn't erase the subtle shifts I noticed when she thought I wasn't looking. One evening, while she was in the shower, I found myself sitting in our bedroom, staring at her purse. It was the same purse she'd carried to that house. The one she brought home from her errand that day. I told myself I wouldn't dig through her things. I'd made that promise to myself before. But as I sat there, the weight of everything I'd discovered so far bore down on me. The hidden phone, the strange emails, the unaccounted for hours, each one was a loose thread. I needed to pull on them, see where they led. My hands felt steady as I reached for the bag, unzipping it slowly, careful not to disturb the way it was sitting. Inside, it was mostly the usual: her wallet, some makeup, a set of keys. But in one of the side pockets, I found something different. A receipt, crumpled up and tucked away like it wasn't meant to be seen. I smoothed it out, holding it up to the light. It was from a high-end restaurant downtown, dated 2 nights ago, the same night she'd said she was at Naomi's. The dinner wasn't for 2 people. It was for 4. My chest tightened as I read the items, each dish more expensive than the last. Wine, dessert, a steak that cost more than what we'd spend on groceries in a week. My hands started to shake. Who were the other 2 people? And why did she lie about it? I folded the receipt and put it back exactly where I'd found it, zipping the bag closed. She'd be out of the shower soon, and I didn't want her to see the storm brewing in my head. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the carpet, willing my heart to stop racing. The receipt wasn't proof of an affair. Not on its own. It wasn't even the most damning piece of evidence I'd found. But it was another crack in the facade. Another layer peeled away to reveal the truth. It confirmed what I already knew. Vanessa was keeping secrets. And those secrets were starting to pile up. The next day, I called my friend Zach. He worked in private security. A guy who knew how to find things that weren't meant to be found. We hadn't talked in a while, but he picked up on the second ring. "Hey man. It's been a while," he said, his voice warm, familiar. "Yeah," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need a favor." He paused. "Everything okay?" I hesitated, then said, "Not really. I think Vanessa's hiding something. I've got a lot of pieces, but I need to connect the dots." Zach didn't ask questions. He never did. "What do you need? Can you dig into some phone records? Maybe check a couple of addresses I've got?" I need to know what's really going on." "Sure," he said. "Send me what you have. I'll see what I can find." By the time we hung up, I felt a small sense of relief. At least I wasn't doing this alone anymore. If Zach could help me find the missing pieces, I might finally be able to see the full picture. Over the next few days, I kept my routine as normal as possible. I went to work, came home, ate dinner with Vanessa. I played the part of the clueless husband, because I knew that as soon as she realized I was onto her, the game would change. She'd cover her tracks more carefully. She'd find new ways to hide what she was doing. I couldn't risk tipping her off. I had to stay calm, keep observing, keep collecting information. Then, on Friday evening, Zach called back. "I've got something," he said, his tone serious. "There's another phone line registered under her name. It's not the one you use for your family plan. It's a completely separate account, opened 6 months ago." 6 months ago. That was around the same time I'd first noticed her behavior shifting: the late nights, the extra errands, the sudden expenses. My stomach dropped. "Do you know who she's been calling?" "Not yet," Zach said. "I'm still working on that. But I can tell you this, the phone's been used almost exclusively at 2 locations. One's that house you mentioned. The other's a downtown office building." The office building. I'd never heard her mention anything about work down there. It wasn't her usual office, and it wasn't Naomi's. "What kind of office building?" I asked. "High-end," he replied. "Private suites, the kind companies use for confidential meetings." I gritted my teeth. Another layer of deception. Another question without an answer. "Keep digging," I told him. "I will," Zach said. "And hey, be careful, okay? You don't know what you're walking into." After we hung up, I sat in the garage for a long time, staring at the wall. My world felt like it was crumbling piece by piece, But at the same time, something inside me was solidifying. The more I learned, the more certain I became. Whatever Vanessa was involved in, it wasn't innocent. And I wasn't going to stop until I knew everything. When Zach called again 2 days later, I could tell by his tone that this wasn't going to be good news. "I've got those call logs," he said, pausing long enough for me to brace myself. "She's been in touch with one number almost daily, same one every morning. Same one late at night. And get this, it's registered to a guy named Justin Ross." Justin Ross. The initials JR flashed in my mind, as if they'd been waiting for this moment to click into place. I gripped the edge of the counter, the phone pressed so tightly to my ear it hurt. "Who is he?" I asked, my voice low and steady, though inside I felt like a dam was about to break. Zach hesitated, which told me he was trying to figure out how much to say. "He's listed as a consultant for a tech firm downtown, but he doesn't seem to have any real office there. Most of his work is done out of private suites. He keeps a low profile, no social media, no public records beyond a P.O. box and a business license." I swallowed hard, my mind racing. "And the house?" "It's a rental," Zach replied. "He's been leasing it under a company name for the last year. Looks like it's used as a meeting spot, clients, associates, that sort of thing. But here's the kicker, Vanessa's car isn't the only one that's been seen there. He's got a whole list of visitors, and she's one of the regulars." My chest felt tight. "How regular are we talking?" "At least twice a week for the last 3 months, Zach said. "Sometimes more. Twice a week." While I was sitting at work, thinking everything was fine, she was meeting this guy in a house I'd never heard of, behind a name I didn't recognize. The picture was becoming clearer, and I hated every piece of it. "Does she know I'm onto her?" I asked. "Not yet," Zach said. "But you need to be careful. If she catches wind, she'll start covering her tracks even more." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "What about that office building downtown?" "I've got a guy checking into it," he said. "I'll let you know what we find." I hung up and leaned against the counter, my heart pounding. Justin Ross. The name echoed in my head like a warning bell. This wasn't just a casual fling, or a one-time mistake. This was calculated, planned. And the more I thought about it, the more certain I became that Vanessa, and this guy, were up to something bigger than I'd imagined. I needed to know what it was before I confronted her. I needed to be absolutely sure. Over the next few days, I kept my routine as normal as possible, even as the weight of everything I knew pressed down on me. Every time Vanessa smiled at me, every time she laughed at something on TV, I wanted to ask her why she was doing this. Why she thought I wouldn't find out. Why she wasn't the woman I thought she was. But I held my tongue. I knew I couldn't say anything until I had more. More evidence, more answers, more understanding of just how deep this went. I started noticing every little thing she did. The way she paused before answering certain questions. The way she always kept her phone within arm's reach, face down on the counter or tucked into her purse. The way she left the house earlier in the morning, saying she had errands to run, but never came back with anything. Each detail piled onto the growing mountain of doubt. Each one a small piece of a puzzle I didn't want to finish. But I kept going. I had to. Late one night, when Vanessa was asleep, I sat down at the kitchen table and opened my laptop. I started searching for anything I could find on Justin Ross. There wasn't much, just as Zach had said. A few vague business listings. A handful of obscure mentions in industry newsletters. Nothing that gave me the answers I was looking for. Frustrated, I opened a private browser tab and tried again, this time searching for the company name listed on the rental property. After an hour of digging, I found a set of documents buried in a public database. They were dry, technical contracts and lease agreements, but one line stood out. A financial transfer from that company to another one. The second company's name was eerily familiar. It was one Vanessa had mentioned before, in passing, when she said she was consulting on a new marketing campaign. My stomach dropped. This wasn't just about an affair. This was about money. This was about my money. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. The pieces were falling into place, and what they were forming wasn't just betrayal, it was theft. Fraud. Whatever Vanessa and Justin Ross were doing, it wasn't just behind my back. It was designed to take something from me, to rip apart the life I thought we'd built together. And the worst part was, She probably thought I'd never see it coming. I knew I had to be smart about my next move. Everything I'd uncovered, every secret call, every suspicious receipt, every unexplained trip had been building up to this moment. It wasn't just that Vanessa was lying. It was that she had planned it all so carefully, so meticulously, that it almost made me question my own sanity at times. But now, with the final piece in hand, there was no doubt left. I was done waiting, done collecting evidence. It was time to confront her, time to finally lay it all out and see her face when she realized I knew. I spent the entire day preparing, going over everything I'd gathered. I printed out call logs, clipped copies of the receipts, and even saved screenshots of her emails. Each piece of evidence was like a nail in the coffin of our marriage. And yet, as I looked at the growing stack of proof, I felt an odd sense of calm. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't questioning myself. I wasn't doubting what I'd seen or second-guessing my gut. I knew exactly what was happening, and I knew exactly what I needed to do. That evening, when Vanessa came home, she was all smiles. She kissed me on the cheek, told me about her busy day, and headed into the kitchen to pour herself a glass of wine. I followed her, my heart pounding in my chest, but I kept my expression neutral. I needed her to stay relaxed, to keep thinking everything was fine at least for a few more minutes. "How was your day?" she asked, her voice cheerful, as she swirled the wine in her glass. "Oh, it was fine," I said casually, leaning against the counter. I watched her sip her wine, completely unaware of what was about to hit her. "How about you? How was your meeting downtown?" Her hand froze for a fraction of a second, then resumed its motion. "Oh, it went well. Just the usual stuff." Her voice was smooth, but I could see the faint flicker of unease in her eyes. "I'm glad to hear that," I said, taking a slow step closer. "Because I have a few questions about your day." Vanessa glanced at me, her brow furrowing slightly. "Questions? About what?" I pulled a folded piece of paper from my pocket and placed it on the counter in front of her. It was one of the receipts I'd found, the one from that high-end restaurant she'd visited without me. "For starters," I said, my tone still calm, "why didn't you mention this dinner? It doesn't look like it was with Naomi." Her eyes widened just a bit, her fingers tightening around the stem of her glass. What is this?" she stammered, trying to keep her composure. "Where did you get this?" "It doesn't matter where I got it," I said firmly. "What matters is that it doesn't match the story you told me." I reached into my pocket and pulled out another sheet, this time showing the call logs. "And then there's this calls to the same number, every single day. A number you never mentioned." Vanessa's face paled. "You went through my phone," she accused, her voice rising. "I didn't have to," I said coldly. "You left plenty of evidence lying around." I placed a third paper on the counter, a copy of the lease agreement for the house she'd been visiting. "And this. Care to explain why you've been spending time at this address? And don't tell me it's work-related." "I already checked." She stared at the papers, her jaw tightening. I could see the wheels turning in her head, trying to come up with an explanation. A lie that could cover all of it. But this time, there was no way out. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. Finally, she set the wine glass down with a trembling hand. "I can explain," she said softly, but there was no confidence in her voice. "Oh, I'm sure you can," I said bitterly. "But you see, Vanessa, I don't want another lie. I don't want another excuse. I want the truth, right here, right now." She looked at me, her eyes pleading. "Eric, please, don't," I interrupted sharply. "Don't you dare try to turn this around. You've been lying to me for months. You've been sneaking around, meeting him, making plans behind my back. So don't stand there and pretend you care about fixing this." Her lips trembled, but she didn't speak. She knew she was caught. I took a step back. The papers still spread out on the counter like a damning exhibit. "I trusted you," I said, my voice quieter now, but no less sharp. "I gave you everything, and you threw it all away." The weight of those words hung in the air. She dropped her gaze, unable to meet my eyes. I stood there, waiting, hoping for something, an apology, an admission, even just a shred of honesty. But all she gave me was silence. Finally, I turned and walked out of the kitchen. I couldn't stand to look at her any longer. I needed air. I needed space. I stepped outside onto the porch, the cool night air hitting my face like a slap. My hands were shaking, my chest heaving as I tried to calm myself. Inside, the woman I thought I knew was standing in the ruins of our marriage, and all I could think about was how we got here. Every lie, every secret, every carefully hidden betrayal, it all led to this. And now, there was no going back. Vanessa froze in the doorway, her hand still on the frame. She looked at me, then at the papers scattered on the counter. The air between us felt like it was buzzing, like the room itself was waiting for her response. I folded my arms across my chest and nodded toward the stack. "I'm all ears, Vanessa." She stepped forward cautiously. Her movement slow, measured. It reminded me of someone walking into a room they knew was rigged with traps. "Eric," she started, her voice low, almost pleading. "It's not what it looks like." I let out a sharp laugh, one that sounded harsher than I intended. "Not what it looks like?" "Because from where I'm standing, it looks pretty damn clear." I jabbed a finger toward the papers. "You've been sneaking around with him for months. Meeting at his house. Calling him every day. Lying to my face. So, please, enlighten me. What is it then?" Her shoulders slumped. She closed her eyes for a moment, then looked at me again. "It's complicated," she said softly. I shook my head, feeling a fresh wave of anger rise up. "Complicated? Really? That's all you've got?" "I don't think it's complicated at all. It's actually pretty simple. You lied. Over and over again. You made me feel like I was going crazy, questioning everything. And all the while, you were off with him, weren't you?" Vanessa's lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't deny it. She just stood there, letting the silence stretch out between us. Finally, she said, "I didn't mean for it to happen this way." My laugh was bitter this time. "Didn't mean for it to happen? What does that even mean? Did you just stumble into his house one day and think, 'Oops, guess I'll start a secret relationship'? Come on, Vanessa. Don't insult my intelligence." She flinched, but I didn't care. I wasn't going to let her off the hook that easily. "You've been lying to me, manipulating me," I continued. "And for what? Did you think I'd never find out? Did you think you were so clever, so careful, that I'd just keep going about my life like an idiot?" Vanessa's hands trembled at her sides. "I wasn't trying to hurt you," she said quietly. "You weren't trying to hurt me?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You weren't trying to hurt me while you were sneaking off with another man, planning God knows what behind my back? Tell me, Vanessa, at what point in all of this did you stop and think about me? About us?" Her silence said more than any words could. I leaned forward, my voice dropping lower, the anger in my chest giving way to something colder. "You can try to justify it all you want, but the truth is, you didn't care. You didn't care about how this would affect me, or our marriage, or anything we built together. You only cared about yourself." Vanessa opened her mouth, then closed it again. For the first time, she looked like she didn't know what to say. "It was never supposed to go this far," she said after a long pause. "It got out of hand." "Out of hand," I echoed. "That's all you can say?" I felt the heat rising in my face, the anger threatening to spill over. "Do you have any idea what it's like to live with that knot in your stomach every day? To feel like you're the one losing your mind while you play innocent?" She stepped closer, her hands outstretched as if trying to bridge the distance between us. "Eric, please, don't," I said sharply, holding up a hand. "Don't you dare ask me to understand, to forgive, to forget. I'm not that guy anymore. I'm not going to be the fool you think I am." My words hung in the air like a final verdict. Vanessa's face crumpled, her carefully crafted mask slipping away. For the first time, she looked genuinely scared. But I wasn't moved. I wasn't about to let her tears, her excuses, her sudden display of vulnerability cloud my judgment. I stepped back, putting more space between us. "You made your choices," I said quietly. "Now you'll have to live with them." I turned away, walked out of the kitchen, and didn't look back. When I woke up the next morning, the house felt different. The kind of different that sinks into your chest and makes you stop and listen. As though the air itself might tell you what's changed. I lay there in bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting to hear the familiar sounds of Vanessa moving through the kitchen. The clink of a mug, the quiet shuffle of her slippers. But the only thing I heard was silence. It wasn't the first time I'd heard her silence, but now, after everything, it carried a different weight. I got up and walked down the hall, half expecting to see her sitting at the table, her phone in hand, pretending everything was fine. But the chair was empty. The counters were clear. No half-empty cup of coffee. No stack of papers she was always too busy to file away. Just the stillness of an empty room. I made my own coffee. Slowly. The sound of the brewing machine the only thing breaking the quiet. As I stood there, holding the mug, I found myself wondering when exactly it had all started to fall apart. Not just the moment I discovered the receipts or the phone calls, or the other man's name, but the moment she decided I was no longer worth the truth. The realization settled in my chest like a stone. She'd made that choice long before I'd caught on. I thought about our marriage, about the life we'd built, the plans we'd made, the years we'd spent together. For so long, I'd believed we were on the same page, working toward the same goals. I thought she was my partner, my equal, my other half. But as I stood there, staring at the empty chair across from me, I knew she'd never seen it that way. To her, I was a stepping stone, a means to an end, someone she could lean on, then cast aside when it suited her. The thought should have made me angry, but all I felt was numb. The anger had burned out the night before, leaving nothing but a hollow ache in its place. I carried my coffee to the living room and sat down on the couch. The house was still and quiet, the morning sun filtering through the blinds. I knew I needed to figure out my next step, but the weight of everything was so heavy that I couldn't move. I just sat there, my mug resting on the coffee table, staring at the floor. My phone buzzed on the cushion beside me, pulling me out of my thoughts. I reached for it and saw a text from Zach. "You okay?" It read. I stared at the message for a long time, then finally typed back, "Not really." A few seconds later, his reply came through. "Need me to come by?" I hesitated, then typed, "Yeah." Within the hour, Zach was at the door. He didn't say much when he walked in, just gave me a nod and a look that said he already knew how bad it was. He sat down in the chair across from me, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped together. "What happened?" he asked. I told him everything. Every detail, every lie, every moment that led to the confrontation. As I talked, he just listened, his expression hardening with each new piece of the story. By the time I was finished, he shook his head. "That's rough, man." "Yeah," I said, my voice flat. "What do I do now?" Zach sat back, rubbing his hands together as he thought. "First, you protect yourself. Lock down the accounts, get the house in your name. Make sure she can't walk out of here and leave you holding the bag." I nodded slowly. It made sense, it was practical. But the thought of turning our life into a series of legal maneuvers, of having to fight to keep what was mine, only made the hollow feeling in my chest grow. "And then what?" I asked. "Then you start fresh," Zach said simply. "You focus on you. On rebuilding. You don't let her take any more from you than she already has." I wanted to believe it would be that easy. That I could just cut her out of my life, rebuild, and move on. But as much as I wanted to let go, I knew the wound she'd left wouldn't heal overnight. Zach leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. "You're stronger than this, Eric. You got blindsided, yeah, but you're still standing. You didn't let her break you." I looked at him, and for the first time all morning, I felt something shift inside me. A spark of resolve. He was right. I'd been hit hard, but I wasn't done. I wasn't going to let her betrayal define me. "Thanks," I said quietly, "for being here." Zach nodded. "That's what friends are for." When he left, I sat alone in the living room for a while, thinking about what he'd said. I knew he was right. I needed to protect myself, to focus on rebuilding. But more than that, I needed to find a way to let go of the anger, the hurt, the betrayal. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't happen overnight, but I had to start somewhere. As the day went on, I started making phone calls. I called my lawyer, explained the situation, and began the process of securing what was mine. I reached out to my financial advisor, locking down accounts and changing passwords. It felt mechanical, methodical, but it also felt like progress. By the time the sun began to set, I'd taken the first steps toward reclaiming my life. I knew there was a long road ahead of healing, of learning to trust again, of figuring out who I was without her. But as I stood in the doorway of our now empty bedroom, looking at the space where her things used to be, I felt the faintest glimmer of hope. I'd been through hell, but I was still here, still standing. And for the first time in weeks, I believed that I could come out the other side stronger than I'd ever been. So there you have it. The moment she thought she had it all figured out, I turned the tables and left her with nothing. But here's what I really want to know. How would you have handled it? Would you have let it all slide, or would you have fought back? Drop your thoughts below, and let's see how many of you would have stood your ground. If this story made you question everything you thought you knew about trust, share it with a friend who might need to hear it. Because in the end, we all deserve the truth, don't we? Trust is the foundation of any relationship, but blind trust can be dangerous. I learned the hard way that ignoring small red flags can lead to devastating consequences. In this society, we must stay vigilant, keep clear records, and pay attention to inconsistencies. When something feels off, don't dismiss it, address it head on. Protecting your heart, your home, and your assets starts with staying informed and aware. Never let emotions cloud your judgment. The lesson is simple: trust, but verify. Stay strong, stay smart, and never allow someone else's deception to destroy what you've built.